Hello, this is Tuesday at 1 o'clock. It's Planet Poet Words in Space, and I'm your host, Sharon Israel. I'm so glad you're with me today for my conversation with poet and award-winning visual artist Pamela Manché Pearce, Planet Poet's intrepid poet at large, on her poignant and powerful debut chapbook, Widowland, published by Green Bottle Press, London. Pamela?
Here I am.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so happy you're here.
Me too.
And we're going to be having later in the show poet and publicist Brandon Amico, who will reveal how poets can best publicize their work. So we will carry on with Brandon at 1:30, and then Pamela, we'll be back to you, just to give everybody a heads up on what's going to happen today. But I'm so thrilled to have you on. Pamela is my wonderful poet at large. Wonderful. And I want to read her bio. That's just for us. Pamela Manché Pearce is a poet and award-winning visual artist who lives in New York. She is poet at large on Planet Poet Words in Space, The Writer's Voice, WIOX Radio. Her work has appeared in ArsMedica, Toronto, the Brooklyn Review, Hudson Valley Center for Contemporary Arts, Between I and Thou exhibit compilation, Mondo Greco, Samba, and the Widows Handbook, Poetic Reflections on Grief and Survival. And I can say a lot more about what Pamela has done in her life, but we're going to be concentrating on her haunting poems about widowhood. Pamela, I want you to tell us about the first poem that you'll be reading, Widow Falling. Just an intro, if you would.
Oh, sure. Widow Falling is one of the first poems that from this chapbook that I had published anywhere. And it was actually you, Sharon, who called me one day and said that there was a call for work for an anthology called the Widows Handbook. I submitted it, and a bunch of things happened around that, but it was published in the Widows Handbook anthology. And as I was preparing for the show today, I reread the introduction to the Widows Handbook, the foreword by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to read the first 3 sentences of that, because I think that they will really create a beautiful context for what we're going to do in the next hour.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
And this is what she says. Death of one's life partner is a loss like no other. Many who have suffered the loss have no words to convey their grief. There are doubts about their ability to carry on alone, and their hopes for a future strengthened by the love that caused them to appreciate their own worth. Mainly through poetry, the compilers of this anthology have provided the words widows feel but cannot often speak. Thank you, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I'm just going to read this first poem, and then we can continue to discuss.
Wonderful.
So the biography of this particular poem. It's called Widow Falling. Tell me how to live this beautiful life. Tell me now. Help me to make bracelets from tin cans, Christmas wrap from toilet paper, and potatoes cut into stars. A gourmet meal from sautéed dice of pillowcase and hot rollers en brochette. To change my watch to an elastic bandage, to drive safely when I am blind, to know when I collapse how to fall, to read the eyes of strangers when they ask me for change to get home, to ask strangers for change so I can get home in their eyes and mine, to know when I am home and how to act when I am there. Help me when I collapse.
That's Pamela Manché Pearce reading her poem, Widow Falling, from Widowland. And I'm just struck, Pamela, how you go from talking about cutting potatoes into stars to help me when I collapse, which is the mundane tasks to the searing realities of widowhood. And going back to that, to what you read by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that you are giving voice to the myriad of widows, new widows, who have no voice,
right,
or can't
right.
even understand what's happening to them.
Well, one of the editors at the Widows Handbook remarked that this book reminded them that madness is an element of the profound grief that we feel when we have lost someone very close to us. And the origin, I began to write this poem in my car after I would go to bereavement group. When I came out of there, I was so unglued and so troubled, and I would often go to a supermarket and buy either a cake or a pie and ask for a spoon. And I would get in the car and I would eat the cake or the pie until I simply couldn't eat any more of it. And then I would get out of the car and I would throw the remains out. And one of the times that I did this, I then wrote this poem in the front seat of my car. And it really addresses to me, it really gives voice to me for this feeling of madness where everything has just fallen apart and reality is no longer what was known before this loss. So.
And it's interesting that you were talking about that you worked as a writer before and as a performance artist, but after your husband's passing, that format was not enough for you. Could you talk a little bit about that? No,
it absolutely didn't work. I mean, I've been writing for my whole life, and I've written many things. Some of them are successful, some of them in the outside world, some of them not. But I was with a group called Word of Mouth, and we had begun as students of Karen Finley, the as far as I'm concerned, the performance artist of all time. And we created our own troupe, and we're having a wonderful time as a group. I was writing my own material. It was very edgy and satirical and very, very exciting. And I was in that group when my husband Barry became ill, and I went right back to it literally weeks after he died, but it didn't work for me at that juncture, and that was the point where I returned to poetry, which had been part of my much earlier life, because I felt that I needed a container that was larger and deeper, and in order to work with this new, I hate to even call it material that I had, which was this profound experience of loving somebody and helping them in a terrible illness, and knowing that they're going to be gone, and then experiencing the end of that person's life. So poetry worked for me, and I returned to it at that point.
Well, it certainly has. The idea of madness and widowhood, you cover, as I said, all spectrums of what it is, and we'll find out in the poems you'll be reading. Would you explain the title? It's such an intriguing title, Widowland. It sounds like the Wonder Wheel almost, or
Disneyland, or
Disneyland.
Well, I was putting together this chapbook in a workshop at the 92nd Street Y with Mark Bibbins, and I had moments, before I was leaving for the group to put a title on this, and it was one of those wonderful things that happens in any kind of creation where you're really, really under pressure, and something fabulous hops out or pops out, and I just knew. I knew instantly that Widowland was going to be the title that I wanted to work with, because I felt that it expressed this, which is what we're saying, this whole terrain. It's not one moment in time, but it's a place that you wind up in, and there's lots of elements to it, and lots of detours, and lots to navigate, and it's a very big place.
It's very surreal, and it's also a state of mind or a state of being.
Yes,
I would think. And this is Planet Poet, Words in Space, an edition of The Writer's Voice at WIOX We're live and local, and I'm Sharon Israel, your host. And joining me by phone from Manhattan is poet and award-winning visual artist Pamela Manché Pearce. And I would like to read Miss Gregg, the editor, Jennifer Gregg, the editor of Green Bottle Press, Pamela's publisher, with her comments on Widowland. Pamela Manché Pearce's debut pamphlet is a heartfelt, sometimes searing account of her thoughts and feelings since the death of her husband. The rawness is tempered with fresh and arresting images. There is love, frustration, loneliness, and hope, human experience told through a specific circumstance. She takes the reader into this widowland, and with which anyone who has experienced loss can identify. As she writes in Widow Falling, "Tell me how to live this beautiful life. Tell me now. Tell me, help me to make bracelets from tin cans, Christmas wrap from toilet paper, and potatoes cut into stars." I thought those lines were worth repeating. Give us a little recap on Widow Falling. And one of the most startling poems, well, there are many, many startling poems in this chapbook, is called Foxed, and you have a particular relationship with nature, I think, in the book and in your life. Would you tell us a little bit about this before you read it for us, Pamela?
Oh, sure, I will. And, you know, one of the things I think about, Sharon, with this chapbook is that the theme really is having and losing, and widowhood is the central theme of that larger theme. And, you know, having and losing is just part of our life from the you know, early on. You know, I think about when you go to school for the first day of kindergarten, you know, that's a huge loss for your mother. Yes. Or, you know, when you go away to college, or your first pet dies. I mean, our lives are, you know, colored, and you know, there's a lot of having and losing. And I was living in Garrison, which is a magnificent hamlet on the Hudson River, and I was living in an isolated country house by myself after Barry died, and something interesting happened. I couldn't wait to leave. As I was cleaning out the house and fixing it and preparing it for sale, I was really itching to get out and get to Manhattan, where I knew I would be more comfortable. And then it was a moment when I realized that the house was sold and that I would be leaving. Everything that I loved about being there became very heightened for me, and I wanted to hold on to it, and it became very magnified, and it was a very heightened experience. And my favorite wild animal in that house was a fox, and so I wrote this poem, Foxed, which I'll read now.
Thank you.
I find a dead fox in my garden. It's one of those winter days when the ground crunches as you walk, and the sun, like a cataracted eye, tries behind a tight membrane of winter sky. I look down at the fox. I know, I don't know, I know. I'm in a flipped book of fox memories, snapping fast. Is he one of the kit of kits I saw on a heat-hazed August afternoon? In light, a wash of topaz. They were so cute in their bright coats and long black gloves, leaping up, pouncing down, like cats, but with little dog bodies, all fluff and vigor. The whole scene golden, the fur, the sun going down, the dry grasses and easy, liquory breeze. Then I saw him once in the driveway, big as life, sunning himself, ruddy fur rippling, black boots and paws swaying from side to side as he rubbed his back into the gravel, mouth open, those slow eyes closed in ecstasy. That one time. I don't need him anymore. A stone in the afterlife now. Maybe the inky velvet and indigo sluice of Venetian canals takes him home to somewhere, or a quivering length of ruby satin lowers him into the safe center of the earth, or something else, to a dark place or light. What do I know about the afterlife of a fox? What do I know about the afterlife? I say goodbye to the Prince of Trouble at my feet, his fur a bristle of rust, his plume tail gnawed to rope. Then from my shovel's tip, where his loose legs tremble in space, his story changes quickly from a romance to matter. And his tooth, once a scimitar, becomes a comma of yellow bone. I don't know. I know. I don't know.
Oh, that's such an intricate, stunning poem. Thank you, Pamela. That was Pamela Manché Pearce reading her poem, Foxed, from her chapbook, Widowland. And just describing the fox and his tooth, once a scimitar, becomes a comma of yellow bone. You're talking about being a widow. Could you explain the connection? I know it's hard to, and that's why poetry exists, because it's beyond the words themselves to convey feeling.
I guess. I mean, this is a new question. So I'm going to take it.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, I love it. Please keep me on my toes, Sharon. Always. When I read this today, what I thought about was that, here this fox is like one of the alpha guys in the wild, and the scimitar is like this sword of this bold and fierce male, and then it just becomes a comma of bone. Then it's just a comma, which is not even a period or an exclamation point. It's just something that's connecting one thing to the other, and it's bone. And in some of the other poems in this book, one of the things that was astonishing to me, being with somebody who actually died in my arms, is that in one moment there are two people in the room, and then after that heartbeat dies in the other person, there's only one person in the room, and that it's a body. It's no longer a living being, and I think that's part of this in there. That it's scimitar, which is a lively and important weapon, and then it's just a comma. It's just bone. So
right, and the scimitar is a symbol of. I mean, it's a weapon. It's a destructive weapon that causes death. And you also say a stone in the afterlife now.
Right.
So that's a poem that we should read like 6 times today, but we do not have time.
But it's that inanimate, it's just the inanimate nature of something that is really gone in that way. So,
right, and the description of the fox alive, the feline and canine quality.
Right.
It gives it a universality that sort of pulls you into widowhood or widowland. It's what can I say? That was Foxed.
Right.
And the cover. I'm looking at the cover. I know you, dear listeners, cannot see the cover, but it's very atmospheric. There's a moon in the forest. It's beautiful, deep blues and moonlight. It's very, very evocative. I think the Widowland cover reflects the mystery of Fox and of the book itself. Could you talk about the design a little bit?
Sure. My editor, Jennifer Gregg, who was just so phenomenal to work with, I was very eager, as all of us are, to see the cover, and I had nothing to do with that. And when the cover came through on my computer, it took my breath away. It was as beautiful as I possibly could have imagined in it. And what Jennifer told me is that she had a woman who was a widow as the designer, and that was a conscious choice on her part. Then she had a group of widows, everybody that she knew who was a widow, she had them look at it, and she had given the designer the task of designing a cover that created an image of the experience of being widowed. And she did. She did an absolutely gorgeous job with it.
What an interesting approach to the cover.
Yes, it's very organic and very authentic, which is very much who Jennifer Grigg is, really.
And Green Bottle Press is a London publisher,
yes.
a London house, and so you've had 3 launches of your book so far, which is fantastic.
I'm not stopping now. There's no stopping me now.
And could you tell us briefly about all 3?
Sure. I was at the Verrocchio Art Center last summer in Tuscany, and at that point I knew, it's outside of Siena, and at that point I knew that this book was going to happen. And I was the only American at one point. Virtually everybody there was British. And the staff said, we know you're a writer. Would you like to give a reading? And it turned out that there were several of us there who were making art and also were writers. So they gave us this beautiful event on the terrace overlooking the Tuscan hills as the sun went down, with lots of Prosecco, and I introduced this book to everyone there. And then in September I went to London and had the official launch of the book in London at the London Poetry Society there. And several of the people from Italy who lived in London were in the audience, and they took me out for dinner afterward, and we had a wonderful time. And then when I came back in October, there's one other American, Kelly E. Sullivan, who was published by Green Bottle Press, and we had a launch a joint launch at NYU at Glucksman Ireland House, where Kelly is a professor. Assistant professor. So that's 3, and then I'll be in Paris in April to read to be a featured reader at Paris Lit Up. Looking forward to that.
Wonderful. I had the privilege of being at the New York launch in Greenwich Village. It was delightful and mesmerizing, and as you can hear by Pamela's reading of her poems today. And you're doing very well with publicizing your book, although it's tough to publicize one's own book. And just tell us briefly about that. I mean, I love what you say about it, because I'm a poet also, and it's like you can do things for other people, but when it comes to yourself, there's something that creates this awful inertia.
Well, I am a former publicist. I was director of publicity and events at Pan American Center. I was there for 15 years, doing publicity on a day-in, day-out basis. And what I discovered is that when people have chapbooks and books of poetry, and especially the chapbooks, to me it's really terra incognita. You don't have any idea how to move forward with doing all of this. There are no guidelines for any of this, and it's a lot of research and searching, and I think that this is one of the reasons that people have these books. Well, Sharon, we work so hard to do our work, is do beautiful work, and then find a publisher, and then get a book. And then people just say, look, I gave a reading, and then I gave up. I didn't know how to do any of this. So that's why, when you talk with Brandon, Brandon has really broken ground on this. He has helped me incredibly. And this is what he does, is he helps to guide us to the next phase of having a book and getting some attention for it.
And you're listening to Planet Poet Words in Space. I'm Sharon Israel with Pamela Manché Pearce. We'll be talking to Brandon Amico. This is Sharon Israel, Planet Poet Words in Space. And I'm here with Brandon Amico. Hi, Brandon.
Hi, Sharon. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's lovely that you're here. You're a poet and a publicist, and I want to tell our listeners a little bit about you. Brandon Amico is the author of Disappearing Ink, Goldwake Press, 2019. He is the recipient of a Regional Artist Grant from the North Carolina Arts Council and the winner of Southern Humanities Review's Huffner Literary Award for Poetry. His poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Blackboard, the Cincinnati Review, Kenyon Review, New Ohio Review, and First Daily, among other publications. And he can be found at, one word, Brandon Amico, BrandonAmico.com, or on Twitter at Amico. And again, Brandon, thanks so much for joining us. Tell me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. How did you come to be a publicist for poets?
Well, I'm schooled in, I ended up getting a degree in marketing because I loved poetry and writing, and then accrued a massive amount of student loan debt within 2 years of being in school and realizing that I'm not going to ever be able to pay it off with poetry. That's okay. It's a passion that we can still have outside of the day job. So I ended up pivoting to marketing because I figured, I could be creative, you could do advertising or something like that. And by some chance encounters, I ended up in the public relations side of marketing as well. So I've been doing that, and I've still kept close with writers, and obviously I read a lot. Like it's my passion outside of work. So I've connected with a lot of folks, and I realized that I could use that skill set of if a company has a product that they're launching, you want to get word out about it. It's not that different from someone launching a book. Obviously, there's a big difference in the production, and I always tell people that this is the latter step, whether it's submitting your work or submitting your book for publication, or when it's accepted, like putting it out there and promoting it is very different, and it's secondary to the actual craft and writing. So I don't want to cheapen the very important stuff that comes before, but this is the after.
Especially in this climate, though, it's so important to have the publicity, to do the publicity, to find somebody who can help you create the publicity.
I think it is. Yeah, and I like to think that that's why people reach out to me, and I like to think it's helpful. I've definitely seen some successes in that people have this great work, and there's so much, I think there were, who was it? Was it the Academy of American Poets, I think it was, or someone did a research recently and said that poetry readership is up like fivefold in the last 10 years, or some crazy amount like that. And that's fantastic for many reasons. The slight underside to that is there are more poets out there and less ability to stand out in the pack because there's so many great poets. And there really are a ton of amazing poets. And there are people, very young poets that are just coming up in the world and really making a mark. There are people that have been writing for a while that are now moving into poetry, or there are people that have just written their first book later in life, and they're all coming from different perspectives, and they're all fantastic. And how do you stand out, and how do you find the people that want to read what you're writing? So
briefly, tell us how you can help a poet that has few funds but needs your help.
Right. So what I often do is, I'm used to working with businesses that have giant marketing budgets. Poets obviously don't have giant marketing budgets. Even if they're working with a publisher, most indie publishers are shoestring budgets. It's a labor of love, and therefore, what I kind of do for those people is come up with a marketing plan. So it's anywhere from a 6 to 12-page document, and it has a bunch of suggestions. It's kind of like a checklist. Like, here's all the things you can do to promote your book. Reach out to bookstores, book reading, reach out to review publications, find individual reviewers, use social media to mobilize people to review your book on Goodreads or Amazon. All these sorts of things you can do. Work on messaging, for example. And this kind of checklist, because, someone managing this whole process, like an assistant, is kind of a full-time job for at least a launch window. But this kind of thing I found is very helpful because often people that have created these books, they're very motivated. Like, they know, like, they want this to be out there. They just don't have as much know-how on how to do it. So having this checklist is all they really need because they have the motivation. They can start knocking these things out. They want to get their book out there.
That's great. So are you publicizing your own book? You have come out with a new book, Disappearing Ink?
Yes. It's coming out on March 12th.
Which is a great pun, by the way, Disappearing Ink. I love that. Because it's INC, like a corporation.
Like incorporated, yeah. And I realized that I kind of backed myself into a corner there as far as how to get that pun across verbally. Because you say Disappearing Ink, like, like the ink, like little, kid's toy or something.
Yeah, it's perfectly clear when you see it on the page, but when you say it out loud, it's totally different.
So in my mind, it's always been Disappearing Ink because I like that, but I've started saying Disappearing Incorporated because maybe that would get it across. But I still don't know because then you. Yeah.
I like the duality, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's a. I love a good pun. So that's all. That kind of came before a lot of the poems too, and I started thinking about, the ways that we interact in, a consumer-facing society, a very consumer-obsessed society, the way that we interact and engage with brands, with what we buy and what we use, and how our self is kind of fractured into different platforms online or different aspects of our lives, how we identify so strongly with our occupation. And, it was a lot of fun, and that idea of disappearing of us, of the self kind of being dissolved into so many different channels was really the guiding force for this one.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Could you read a poem? Would you read one of your poems for us, please? From that.
Certainly.
And it's
thank
aptly
you.
named, considering it's a sort of a corporate title.
Right. And not all of the poems do follow that. They touch on a lot of different aspects. And there's a lot of musical references in here as well, but it was much more pronounced in earlier ones. But yes, there are some talk about the business aspect. This one is called Audit. Quick, do you recall every last thing about your mother, her favorite Beatles songs, the brand of her jeans? Ask not what your country does for you, but what it makes affordable. Balance cost-benefit, review weight and texture, the memory a stone in the hammock of your stomach, while the good ones turn on above you with a zap, a halo of Christmas lights. The stars arranged across the porch, and eves and constellations of simpler holiday visits. A lamplight coming in from the yard, snowfall disappearing in the denim.
That's Brandon Amico reading his poem Audit from his book Disappearing Ink or Disappearing Incorporated. I love going, when you talk about your mother, going from her brand of her jeans to seeing the stars, from the hammock. Very beautiful.
Thank you.
Brandon, so you essentially will follow your own advice, correct? For creating publicity for the book. And you had mentioned to me that the checklist is like a guidebook too.
Yeah,
and that's
I like to think of it like that.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon. The minutes have flown, and
certainly,
Brandon Amico, and
thank you so much for having me, Sharon.
Bye. And that was a bit of Gustav Holst's The Planets. And we are back now with Pamela Manché Pearce. Hello, Pamela. Hello.
I was able to hear Brandon, and it was wonderful.
Oh,
it was great.
I am so sorry. I didn't get a chance to mention that you and Brandon met at the Massachusetts Poetry Festival, I think in 2016.
Correct.
And that started the ball rolling. But so interesting. And I know how much work it is to do this. It is a full-time job to publicize your book. Back to your Widowland. You wrote a poem called Pantoum, and Pantoum is actually a type of poem, and you use the type of poem as the title of the poem. And could you just explain a little bit about the poem's form?
Sure. The form is a braided form of repeats. And the way that I understand it, and there are lots of origin stories for the for the form, but that some French soldiers were in Indonesia on some kind of an exploratory mission, and they got involved with the storytellers there who used a form that was similar to the pantoum, where they were repeating and braiding, and they came home and they introduced it to writers there, who then transformed it slightly, and that's how we have a pantoum now.
A very valuable contribution.
Sure, it is. It is.
And so meaningful to your poem. I'd like you to read it now, and then we'll discuss it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Pantoum. My life includes a tragedy simply by loving that one man. It's never over and cannot be understood. Yes, there was joy and sorrow too. Simply by loving that one man in sickness and in hell. I was no hero. Yes, there was joy and sorrow too. I'll always remember the details. In sickness and in hell, I was no hero. There were moments of romance and terror. I'll always remember the details. What we suffered, then all locked up. There were moments of romance and terror. No one ever asked me the details. What we suffered, then locked up. Thank God I never had to tell it all. No one ever asked me the details. His life was more than a mere tale of horror. No one wants to hear a story about dying. I slept beside his bed. The cancer worked on. His life was more than a mere tale of horror. Others worked around us, not in it with us. I slept beside his bed. The cancer worked on. Days went by, too fast, too slow. Others worked around us, not in it with us. Living kept on in the faces of family and friends. Days went by, too fast, too slow. His dying consumed us, as had our love. Living kept on in the faces of family and friends. We didn't know when the moment would come. His dying consumed us, as had our love. We had kisses and the morphine drip. We didn't know when the moment would come, but I had no escape from being left behind. We had kisses and the morphine drip. I couldn't avoid the tragedy. I had no escape from being left behind. It's never over and cannot be understood. People like me always go on. My life includes a tragedy.
That's Pantoum by Pamela Manché Pearce. And it ends, my life includes a tragedy, as it begins, with the same line.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those lines, usually you have for wedding vows in sickness and in health. This is sickness and in hell. And but others worked around us, not in it with us. There are so many things to go over, but the form itself describes what you went through, enhances the emotions and the horror of it, actually. If you would talk a little bit about how the form informs, the poem.
Sure. I was in a workshop with Billy Collins, and I brought this in, and that was one of the things that he gave me some very positive feedback about, which was that, this form, it really it mirrors the unrelenting nature of being in a situation like this. I mean, it's this thing is going on 24/7, and it's just going on, and it's going on, and it's on, and also, the container. This pantoum form sort of cools down the subject so that people the reader can actually take it in, and and get through all of this information. Of this is really a story about this couple. You know, what they had before and what's going on during, and what they're both anticipating will happen when this is over with. So
I also think it's a container for the reader, so the reader can get through it, as you mentioned.
Absolutely right.
But it's also a reflective of a container for the poet who is barely getting through this.
Exactly.
And that comes across in that, I won't say contain, as you described, contain madness, but the fact that the line repeating, one of the lines repeating, I had no escape.
Right.
And it's the perfect form for this poem. And others worked around us, not in it with us.
Right.
That, the isolation of it, with all the activity, and I know from what you went through, the tons of strangers and helpful people, wonderful people, but you're in your own Dantean circle with this. I also would like to talk a little bit about the seamless structure of your chapbook, Widowland. It flows beautifully from one poem to the other, and it's very vivid.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The color red looms large in the book's palette. There's much color in the poems, and used as I would call it your emotional palette. If you would talk a little bit about that, Pamela.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, Sharon, because I had a proofreader. I had this proofread, and I sent it to her. And the first thing she said to me when she called me, she said, "Why isn't there red in the title of this book? Because there's red. Red is everywhere." And I happen to love the color red, and I also, when I think about it, I think it is the color of it is life. I mean, it's the color of blood, and there are both sides of that. I mean, it's what keeps pumping and keeps us going all the time with this, and it's also it really also signals the end of life. I mean, bloodbath, all of these different expressions that have to do with blood, and the feeling that a loss of blood is really the loss of life. So, but I love red. I use it liberally. I employed it liberally in this book, but I did not want it to be in the title.
Right. I think it's more powerful as an enrichment of the book, not necessarily the title, because that would just take it sort of takes you out of the sphere of the Widowland, I would think. And
it's something different.
One of the most, I would say, technicolor poems that you have in the book, and one of the most intense, is McQueen's Last Dresses, and that's referring to the late great designer, Alexander McQueen. Would you talk a bit about it before you read the poem to us, Pamela?
Well, I will. I mean, in my mind, every poem has a backstory, and every poem, and I'm actually thinking of taking these poems and writing the story of each one of these poems, and see where that takes me. And with McQueen's, I had been in this performance group I mentioned before, and literally weeks after Barry died, I went back because I wanted to be with everyone. And Karen Finley gave me an assignment to go to the Met, and one of the things that I saw at the Met was a Savage Beauty exhibition of Alexander McQueen's work in 2010.
Unbelievable exhibit, actually.
It was an unbelievable exhibit. It's just astonishing, and I was very taken with it, and I was particularly taken with one of the dresses called Joan. So why don't I just read this poem, and then we can talk more. McQueen's Last Dresses, and here is a epigram from Robert Burns' Tam O'Shanter. Coffins stood round like open presses that showed the dead in their last dresses. I like it when you spread your skirt's lips open with skeletal fingers. Slide me down your knob of skull, your face strapped into a mask of red leather. Your neck, a tattoo of red lace pulled tight. My beads, a million red drops of glass, slip past your cool shoulders. my fringe descends, spills down your breasts, parted into strands by your hard nipples. I roll over your curves easily, swish the backs, fronts, insides of your legs as I prance the runway toward a circle made for fire. Whoosh of flames surrounds us. I melt in drops that could be blood beside your blackening feet. As fire licks and hisses higher, the audience, wild, watches us with horror and joy as we go down together, a jumble of seared flesh and unstrung beads that skitter across the burning floor.
My goodness.
I was really taken by that dress.
Oh, my goodness.
Joan. I loved it.
That's Pamela Manché Pearce reading her poem, McQueen's Last Dresses. I love the epigraph. You can't really expect after you, well, you do. It's pretty grim, but the technicolor of this poem is unexpected from the epigraph. I love that you tell it from the dress's point of view, which is quite rare. I don't know if anybody's ever done that before. You tell me.
Well, there's always the first time, but it just felt absolutely right.
Incredible.
It just felt like that. I wanted to be that dress, so I got my opportunity.
Oh, and there's Joan of Arc in here. Am I not mistaken?
No, that's Joan. Sure.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think that this is one of the iconic figures that he chose to, and it makes so much sense for Alexander McQueen that this life of tremendous passion dedicated to something that Joan, the story of Joan of Arc that would end with such tragedy and at an early stage. I mean, he's really it's also his story in many ways.
Yes.
So.
And he's gone. And he's also a person who's gone.
Yes.
And he would love this poem.
Oh, good.
He's hearing it. He knows. He loves it.
Maybe in the next life.
He loves it. This hour has flown.
Yes, it has.
I want you to read at least two more poems if you can. Right. The next poem is very different from the McQueen's Last Dresses, and it's called Respite.
Yes. I'll just set this up by saying that during the 10 months of my husband's illness, I had 2 nights off, and both of those nights I came into Manhattan and I went to jazz clubs because they are home plate for me. I feel very comfortable and very at home. This is a sonnet, and I'm going to read it as Respite. I find my way into an underground jazz club, down and down, into a dark red room, shuddering with the city that surrounds it. Here, black men hold gold and silver in their hands. I breathe. I rest my head on a fake red leather banquette. Listen. Let all the nights, hours, sets I've spent in clubs like this love me back. I catch my breath after a sax solo, think, how can I be here? Because it's good for me to get out and remind me I'm alive. I have a night off from my husband's dying. I'm working with the drummer as he says something to my aorta that is blood knowledge they own together. Then a bossa nova beat insinuates itself into me. I'm a dancer in a chair. Conga hands shadow on the drum skin like the beating of birds' wings ascending too fast for my eye to see.
That's Pamela Manché Pearce reading her poem Respite from her chapbook Widowland. The dancer in the chair is just a spectacular image. It's as if you deserve to be at the club, but you can't really get up and dance all the way.
Right.
Would you agree with
absolutely.
that?
Yes, it is. I mean, it really is. That's as far as the woman in this poem can go in this particular situation. Absolutely, Sharon.
But I have a night off from my husband's dying. It's hard to listen, but it's wonderful to listen
Thank you.
this.
Thank you.
and we have very little time.
Okay.
But do you want to squeeze in one more poem?
All right. Well, I mean, I can try. Let me just think of what's. I can try to rip through my TV family. How much time do we have, Sharon?
Well, we have a bit. We have less than 2 minutes, so maybe Tree of Cardinals.
All right. I have to just. I just have to find it. So.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay. Tree of Cardinals. I stand in my dead husband's study and look out the window at an expanse of winter. I focus on a small bare tree, a tree of bones. I imagine a cardinal there in ornament on the barren branches. A voice tells me I can have a cardinal and one appears. Then it says I can have as many cardinals as I want. I imagine another, and it appears, then another and another, until the tree is ablaze with small crimson birds. What is red? What is red to me? Everything that blood is. Red is the fabric apple stitched onto my first day of school dress, and the real one my grandfather has shined from my teacher. It is the color of his cracked fingertips that smell of gasoline as he cups my face to kiss my hair goodbye. I have as many cardinals as I want. Thank you, Sharon.
That's beautiful, Pamela, and thank you so much for being on the show. If you want more information about Pamela Manché Pearce and Widowland, Pamela, could you just briefly tell us your website?
It is www.PamelaMPearce.com.
Thank you so much, Pamela.